This week, in the conversation, I have the privilege to welcome out of London, Britain, British writer Fifi Pottier. She is the author of a compelling fantasy novel titled Vampire Emily. But before we get into the video, just going to remind you it's important to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And if you do, don't forget to click the notification bell so that way every time a video is posted, it goes directly into your portable. So let's get started. Again, my name is Ardain Isma, and I'm here this afternoon with a compelling author, Fifi Pottier. She's joining me from London in the UK. It's an honor for me to really have Fifi. So Fifi, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
All right, but to begin with, would you please tell the viewers of CSMS Magazine who is Fifi Pottier?
So, I'm Fifi. I have written a vampire book I'm very proud of. I even have it here to show, Vampire Emily.
Very good.
This was my debut book under myself, and I suppose there's just a lot of learning to do, but it's something that I'm very proud of. And I suppose what sets Vampire Emily out from other novels of the genre is, and I suppose this is coming back to my background, in that growing up, I'm a huge horror fan. I love the vampire genre. I love witches and zombies and all of those. But the books that I fell in love with as a teenager and as a young adult, and even now, a lot of them very much portrayed the main character as your traditional cis person, and it ended up being, if it was a woman involved, it was very much a white woman. And so one of the things that I wanted to do and step away from in writing Vampire Emily was, I didn't want to describe what she looked like. I didn't want to describe any physical attributes about her, because I really felt it was important that as the reader, you connected with her, but that you also felt that she was somebody you could be. And I think that's something that's so important, especially for minority groups, whether you're gay, black, trans, or anything else, to have something that's not cutting you off from enjoying a story and reading a story and then feeling that you're not represented. And so for me, it was a hard challenge, because how do you write a book where you don't describe the main character? So yes, the way I did it was, to be honest, I thank my editor, because she was amazing.
Okay. But now, just before we get into that, Fifi.
Yeah.
Because I know that the book tied somehow, because writers write, and they write best when they write about their world with some beautiful novelistic prose.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, if you write about a community that you were born and raised in, or you talk about a country that you know,
Mm-hmm.
or you talk about some personal experiences that somehow have had tremendous impact with your life. So
Mm-hmm.
you at your best. So I know you a fantasy author. I've read some of your writings, and I'm tremendously impressed with what you do as a writer.
Thank
Let
you.
me ask you this question, Fifi.
Yes.
The character Emily,
Mm-hmm.
okay, is embodied in you now.
Yes.
You see yourself into the character as you describing her, because she seems to be living a perfect world until she's turned into a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Is that some of the strange circumstances that led her to become a vampire?
Yes.
Do you expand it too well?
I see myself in Vampire Emily, but I also see myself in many of the different characters. The reason why I started to write it was, as you know, I'm a huge horror and vampire fan, and I got so annoyed with some of the books that I was reading and how, heaven forbid, I felt that some of the characters were a bit one-dimensional. And were a bit too good for stuff. And so I wanted somebody who was real, that people could connect to, that wasn't always going to do the right or the wrong thing, but was human. And so with Emily, it was very much about, what do you do when you're in situations that you are unsure of? And so, of course, there are aspects which I think, and that's the beauty of writing, especially within fantasy, is to give that and bring that across to the person, to be able to give something that they would feel, that they would know, and that they understand, but also in this fantasy world.
Exactly. But I see something more between the lines of Vampire Emily.
Mm-hmm.
I also see a life of a struggle.
Yes.
You know, I see humanity through her struggle. And I seem to understand why. Because a story like this that is penned by someone who knows what it means to go through horror.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it couldn't be any more reflective of that person's writing, and the person is Fifi Pottier.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to agree with you. And I think this is coming back to, I wanted a character that was more developed, who'd gone through more hardships, because I think that's where, as readers, you connect with people. It doesn't matter, well, with the characters. It rarely matters where the character is or where they're from and stuff. It's that it helps to develop your understanding of what you don't know. And with Emily, and this is where I wanted her to be a much more deeper character, was in creating something that's very complex. And I think you're right. When it comes back to my own life, I've had a huge number of struggles, as you know, as you've read. And I think one of the key things that when it comes to reading is such a beautiful escapism, but it's also a huge opportunity to learn.
Exactly.
And for me, whether I'm reading fantasy or fiction or even non-fiction, I always want to take that opportunity to learn.
Right.
But also that opportunity to develop my sense of self. And that's what I wanted to portray to the reader. I wanted to have the reader, as I used to, because for me, I've always escaped into the fantasy land, into...
I know. Yeah, you're not the first British writer who told me.
Yeah, I escape into them as fantasy, but also as a nicer way to make sense of the world that I don't understand. And I suppose that's what's been resonating with Vampire Emily. It's that it's not a matter of, oh my gosh, I've been turned into vampire, lo and behold, what do I do now? And I've got a crush. It's that I wanted to bring more about the emotions, the turmoil, the troubles, but also I think I wanted to bring with her was the human side of it, because we are so multidimensional, and in the same way, we can love and hate the same person.
Right.
And I wanted to bring that out across it all. And I also wanted to take away the safety that often happens in books, and I hope I did that without giving any spoilers.
You know why I can safely say that you did? Because I read your some of the things that you write in your blog website.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's something you say, and I just want to read it. I gotta get my spectacles so I can get it right.
Oh my gosh.
You see, most people don't know or understand how to grow to give constructive criticism.
Oh my God,
and
yeah.
as such, come across as rude, callous, or just mean. You said that as a way that to teach a reader, to teach someone who's been very someone whose skepticism will keep that person from see light through a person critiques or a literary critique. Why did you feel it was really important to write this the way you did?
In my blog, it's not just about my books. I think it's very much about life. And so how you take criticism, how you give criticism is very telling of the kind of person that you are. I find it always an honor when somebody's going to give me feedback. But one of the barriers that happens when you're giving feedback is that in the back of your mind, are you thinking, are they going to get upset by it? Should I actually give it to them? And so I think it's important, not just about the book, and of course it was relating to the book, but it's about life in general. When you're giving criticism, you've got to think of the other person. And that's when within it, I think I said you should have a shit sandwich. You tell them something good and positive, you tell them the bad news, and then you tell them something negative again, positive again. And so in that way, and I think this goes through my blog, it's that it's a matter of, these are things that I've learned and that have helped me and that I want to help other people in understanding. And so in terms of taking criticism, it's not just about my book. It was very much about my book within there, because Rob was the one who was very kindly and honest about what he told me. But it's a reality thing. It's that, how do you tell somebody that they should do better without it being about them? And I think what I wanted to very much get a point across was that we need to be more mindful with each other. We don't know what other people are going through. And so there are particular ways that you can give bad news or criticize somebody. And that's very much about criticizing their work, not them as a person.
Exactly.
And so if you criticize a person, obviously you're going to get defensive, because why are you being mean to me? Whilst if you're saying it's not about you, it's about this particular aspect, this work that you have done, or this job, you could do better. I want better. I expect better. And then being able to turn around and say, this is how you could do better. It takes away from the defensive mechanism, and it takes away from the being insulted. And it suddenly then becomes a learning point rather than...
Beautiful, exactly.
And that's what I wanted to get across. It's that I wanted people to be like, no one's going to give you roses all the time. And you shouldn't expect it, because if they do, they're not your mates.
You're right.
Like, the people who love you are going to be honest with you, but there's always the right way to give advice. And that's what I wanted to get across.
Beautiful. And I think not just me, your readers really got the point.
Thank you.
Now, let me ask you something, because I know you said since at a very young age, Fifi, you had developed a passion for reading and writing.
Yes.
So was that when you were in primary school you're talking about?
So I suppose, yes, it would have been primary school, because I got adopted when I was 6, and then I came over to the UK. My parents brought me over here. And and obviously the schools taught me to read and write. So it was junior. So you've got junior, and then you've got primary. No, it was, sorry, infants, primary. Yes, so it's infant school.
Right.
And so, yeah, it took a while for me to learn to read. I was behind because I'd only come across the alphabet at 6.
Right.
But then afterwards, I fell in love. I fell in love with
Reading.
yeah, there's just so much you can gain from it and worlds to experience. And yeah.
You have always been fascinated with fantasy?
Um, in terms of my reading, yes, I'd normally would take, yeah, so if it's for pleasure, I would read fantasy. I'd read fiction. It's always fiction, to be honest, unless it's something that I want to develop a skill. And so if it's academic or to do with my job, I'll obviously then read the papers and the work that needs to be done because it's about developing your skill.
Right.
But yeah, for pleasure, I like fiction.
Okay. So now my next question. So when did you actually sit down and begin to write Vampire Emily?
I've had the idea and I'd played around with it for many years, but it literally it was the end of last year. Yeah, it was the end of last year that I was like, I need to get serious, and wrote about, and I thought I'd done a good job, and that's when I employed my editor, and that's when she told me I'd done a shit job.
It's okay.
And then I had the pleasure of realizing how poor my English was, my grammar, my structure. There was so much to learn.
And I know why you were thinking this way, because you are a perfectionist.
I am not.
Yeah.
No, there's just so much things that I don't know. And I suppose like when it starts with something which is a hobby, you go, you know what, I'll just try it. I'll have a play around with it. And then I was just so happy that I'd finished. And when I'd written it in the first person, but she turned around and said, there's so much information that you're missing because it's in the first person. I was like, I'm not going to tell everyone because it's a mystery. Like that's part of the joy of reading. It's the discovering as you go along through the pages. Exactly. And so yeah, she was like, it doesn't work in first person. And I was like, you want me to write in what? Another tense? And that's when I discovered the third person trisomniscent. And yeah, it was a game changer because it allowed me to keep the mystery, which I had within first person, but I could also then hop into the other characters so that I could give them bits and pieces that they would know without ruining or giving away the story as it was
the plot itself. Yeah. Now let me ask you something, because I know that Vampire Emily is a sequel.
Yes.
And when do you plan on releasing part 2?
Okay, so Vampire Emily is now a trilogy.
Oh, it's trilogy.
Yeah, so it's a trilogy. I was halfway through the sequel, and so originally I'd planned to release it at the end of the year, this year, or the beginning of next year. But I've stopped because based on feedback I've had from my website, I decided that I'd try and put together everything that I had learned along the way, because I've been very fortunate. Like if you've been on my website, you know bits about me and stuff that I've gone through. I'm also very fortunate enough to have been able to afford a therapist, which a lot of people who've gone through trauma aren't able to do. And so what I wanted to do is just put like what are the things that I wish I'd known earlier. A lot of things are basic things like being your own best friend and stuff, learning to listen to yourself. A lot of things are very basic. So yeah, I ended up very much putting the sequel to the sidelines, and I'm now in the process of writing a non-fiction book about becoming whole. Mhm.
I know you were born in Rwanda, and
Mhm.
although I'm not sure how much Rwandan culture that still that I can still find in you, because you were raised in a completely different environment.
Mhm.
But is there anything you remember when you were very young before you immigrated to the UK with your parents?
Oh my gosh, there's so much. It's literally my life is in like weird stages. Like I remember, and I think I wrote it on there, my fear of white people.
I
Like I have done that. It's such a contrast. It was such a huge contrast that
Right,
of course I remember it. It's coming from middle of Africa to England,
right.
completely different places. So yeah, there's a lot that I remember, but also one of the conditions of my adoption was that I kept in touch with my biological family. And so I've always known my biological side as well as my adoptive side. So my family is just insanely huge, really big.
Have you ever been back to Rwanda since then?
Yes, because my parents were in touch with my biological mother.
Okay.
We used to have regular phone calls. Like I went back there. Yes, I've gone back, and then my sisters, when my biological mother died, my sisters came over to the UK. So, and it's not even just my sisters. It's like I've got my biological uncles, aunties,
Right,
cousins.
right.
It's very much like a huge extended family because my parents
Because of that, yeah.
that and I think it's like part of it because where they were white, they wanted to keep that relationship as well.
Okay. So that means uh, a Rwandan cuisine is not too foreign to it's not too foreign to you.
Oh my god, it's delicious, but you'd have to ask my sister to cook for that. So I've
Okay,
got two younger sisters which are biologically related to me,
okay.
and Denise is the better cook. Her
Really?
food is
Delicious.
mm-mm.
Delicious. Now, because I know, how do you find yourself living, in the world? Because you say when you just immigrated to the United Kingdom, so you felt some sort of a strange feeling. You have
Mhm.
been transplanted into a
Mhm.
strange world. So I'm sure that was years ago, but now you're completely British. So really, can I still say that you are totally British at this point?
I'm totally British. I
Okay,
am so westernized. It's
okay,
yeah, that's not a thing. I am completely westernized, and I notice more so, especially when I go back to Africa,
okay.
because there are certain ways to behave, especially as a woman and as a lady, that I don't subscribe to because what I've been brought up. Um, but yeah, like Africa is still in my heart. I love it. It's amazing. But again, yes, I'm very, very westernized. However, when I first came over here, as you started to ask, it was a huge shock. It was a huge culture shock. And it wasn't just because there were like of the race thing, because I used to think white people were cannibals. It was very much more the fact that it was built. So I came from like rural villages
Mm,
to suddenly living in
huge
cities.
metro.
Like, yeah, there was like tap water when I used to actually go and collect the tap water, like collect water with
Mm.
jugs on my head.
You remember that?
Yeah. But I think like where I've got so much memory of my younger years of my pre-six-year-old self is because
Mm,
the contrast was so big. It was such a difference.
it's so big. It's so big.
How about
Uh,
you? Like, what did you find
well,
when you
yeah,
came?
it was a good question. It was not too difficult. You're gonna find in the story that I've written, and it's set
Mm-hmm.
to be published I don't know, but sometimes next year.
Yeah.
But I'm sure when you'll be able to have an idea of the struggles I went through, to find my way into what you call that so-called mainstream society.
Yes.
But it was a huge struggle. It wasn't easy for me. First of all, I couldn't speak English.
Yes.
That's number one.
Could you
But
speak
also,
French? Could
yeah,
you
I
speak
spoke French.
French?
Yeah, I spoke French and Creole, but no English whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I had to learn not just English, but also the culture. One thing, Fifi, I said to myself, if I can get this far, I will not confine myself into a Haitian community. I come to the United States, but not to a specific area just because of the fact that I can find my ethnicity. I can blend with it. I love it. I love the food. When I go down to Miami, to Little Haiti, where I really grew
Yeah.
up, I love the music, but also I want to be an American. Because until then, I will always live in the fringe of society, and I don't want that. I want to be in mainstream with my own intake, with my own flavor, with my own, but still, if I want to be a productive citizen and I want to be a professional, I really need to be mainstream. So that came at a very young age. I was thinking that way. So that's why I had no problem moving away from the community, because I already had this instilled in my mind. But it wasn't easy at all. It was tough. Tough at school. Even in my college years were very, very difficult. I went through a lot of hardships, money-wise, paying the bills. My sister and I, it was very, very, very difficult. But then again, I can look back and reflect upon those years, and I see, it's the same thing. I say, well, my gosh, when I look back to see where I came from.
It is. It's those moments when you go, I've done this, I've achieved this. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's such a beautiful thing. Like, look where you are now, look what you've done with your life. It's fantastic. Like, you must be so impressed with yourself, because I'm impressed at you.
But these days, you can't be a Haitian and not to be concerned of what's going on with your motherland, who would say, our Haitians would say. I will be happy if I can live to see the day where Haiti rises again from the ashes and reclaim its rightful place in history, just like the way it was back in the 19th century. That is a personal struggle, but that also is my wish.
No, and I think that's it. I think that's a lot of history, especially in Black-centric nations and countries. The way that history is written is that a lot of our natural history, our background, are whitewashed.
Now, for the last question, Fifi, if I were to ask you this question, let's say a young person like you,
I'm not that young,
who would want to embark upon a journey to teach the world, through personal experiences using the pen. So, what would you say?
Would you repeat the question?
If you were to be, now, if a young person like you would want to be embark upon upon a journey, teaching the world, through his or her own personal experiences, using his or her pen. So what lesson would you give that young person like you?
I think speak from the heart and be true. And that doesn't mean that you have to be telling what you see. Like, I can turn on and be like, oh, in my room I've got these plants. That's not interesting. Like, you want to be able to tell the story and tell the journey. But for me, it's about getting lost in the words And from there, it's where you speak the truth, because it goes beyond the ABCs. And once you get through it, it then becomes the tale, which takes on its own form. So go with it. And obviously, first draft is going to suck.
All right. So with that, I'm just going to say it's been such a pleasure
Thank you so much
to
for having me.
have such a wonderful author, Fifi Pottier, fantasy author, in the conversation.